talk a little bit about James Bond, because James Bond is once again being censored in many ways. It's so weird.
He's on trial.
It's so weird that he's become this character that's becoming kind of synonymous with censorship. But it says, "License to Offend. BFI season gives James Bond trigger warnings." The season celebrating the works of British composer John Barry flags films from the 60s and 70s that contain outdated language, images, and stereotypes that will cause offense with a C because it's British. Ugh.
The British Film Institute is a non-profit organization in the UK that promotes film production, and it's not affiliated with the government. So honestly, at first I thought it could have been a government association because they just have such heavy censorship there. But these will just be trigger warnings that are placed before all of the movies that are presented there.
Yeah, because they're celebrating the specific composer's work.
Sort of like the trigger warning that's in front of Gone with the Wind, or what was the other one? The Disney one.
Song of the South.
Song of the South.
I think they ended up removing that one entirely.
And then they removed the ride at Disney.
The titles that are included here are for historical, cultural, and aesthetic reasons, and the views are in no way endorsed by the British Film Institute or its partners. I hate this. First of all, I hate the idea that you get to retroactively go through and change someone else's work. You do not get to soften the language used by Ian Fleming. Those were his words, not yours. He did not write with today's context, nor should it ever be interpreted by today's context. What you should do is give your readers and viewers the courtesy to treat them as adults with functioning brains to understand that this was not something created in the current year. You could also do that by looking at the technology that was used or looking up the year that it was produced.
Wow.
The infantilization of people is insane.
An additional warning was added to 1967's You Only Live Twice, declaring that it contains outdated racial stereotypes because Sean Connery tries to pass as Japanese in one of its scenes.
They also mention the stereotype of disabled people being evil. What? The hell are you talking about?
Actually,
I don't know. We just got all that Stephen Hawking news, so what the hell do I know? Maybe I'm wrong.
Goldfinger has another note that it includes a scene in which Sean Connery apparently forces himself on Honor Blackman's Pussy Galore in a hay barn. In a 1959 letter concerning the novel from which the film was adapted, Ian Fleming explains that this, quote, laying on of hands was from the right man was all which was required to cure the lesbian character of her psychopathological malady. So I guess that would be considered homophobic in this day and age.
Oh yeah.
Other scenes that were covered by the trigger warning include Michael Caine thrillers Deadfall and Ypres File, the surreal Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton drama Boom, and Judi Dench kitchen sink drama 4 in the Morning. So this isn't the only, like, James Bond isn't the only thing that's getting trigger warnings.
There
Who
are
these warnings for? Like, who's going to be seeing them?
Art nerds?
Because
art nerds can't be offended these days?
There's a couple of scenes, even in Skyfall, that you've seen Skyfall. There's a shower scene that's depending
dominant
on
sex.
It's
dominant sex.
Like nowadays, I don't know if that one would fly for that character because he's a franchise character. If you're just making a regular movie, maybe you get away with that scene, and we understand that it's very real to the Bond lore. But I don't know if that scene would fly in a Bond movie these days. I don't.
A spokesperson for the British Film Institute told The Guardian, as a cultural charity with responsibility for the preservation of film and moving image work and presenting it to audiences.
You're not preserving it.
You're not preserving it. You're changing it.
You're changing it, you douche.
We continuously face and deal with challenges presented by the history of film and television and how they reflect views prevalent to their time. So, whilst we have a responsibility to preserve films as close to their contemporaneous accuracy as possible, Even where they contain language or depiction which we categorically reject, we also have a responsibility in how we present them to our audiences. The trigger warnings that we provide in all our exhibition spaces and online platforms act as guidance that a film or work reflects views of the time in which they were made and which may cause offense. So
no one's going to take any guidance from any of that.
You're assuming that we need guidance because you think that we're idiots.
Yes, they do.
Such a waste.
They think they're smarter than you. They think they're better than you. They think that they're the elites, and I hate it. I hate these people. Probably more than anything is the type of person that gets to delegate to you what art is and what art is safe, what art isn't. And the idea that society can't make these decisions for itself is insane, given that these institutions wouldn't exist without free men and women making the art to be interpreted in the first place.
Right.
I can't stand it.
This is a blackpilling statistic. In a 2021 survey that they conducted, 2/3 of teenagers supported trigger warnings on films which negatively affect their mental health. These issues include anxiety, stress, depression, key issues of concern for 13 to 18-year-olds, followed by body image issues, suicide, and self-harm. Yet 68% of the teenagers said they found positive on-screen portrayals were helping in expunging stigma, while nearly half said they found such portrayals educational. So you're at once not supposed to depict difficult topics like suicide, self-harm, mental health, body image issues, but also you should because it destigmatizes them, but you have to do it in the way that we dictate to you. And if you don't, we're going to add a trigger warning or just censor your film altogether.
Look, sounds like you got it. Yeah.
Glad I'm on the same page with them.
I've mentioned several times that given my past substance abuse, I can't watch Requiem for a Dream. It's just depressing to me now. It doesn't trigger me, but it certainly doesn't put me in a great headspace. That's my problem.
Well, now it should be, if you try to stream Requiem for a Dream, you'll get a trigger warning that is personalized to you.
Yes!
Brett Dasovic, if you are about to watch Requiem for a Dream, then
that's what that AI will do.
Please be advised that it is triggering.
So AI will do it.
No, we've talked before about the Christian app that removes sex scenes from movies and stuff like that.
I want that.
Everyone will have their own.
I would pay for that.
Everyone will have their own version of that just cuts out the stuff that's triggering to them. But we don't grow as a society if we're not at least exposed to things that make us uncomfortable once in a while. And I certainly don't need some moral busybody group. Not even moral, just stupid. Like, I guess they're making it on moral grounds, but I certainly don't
It's the new Puritanism. If you can't stigmatize sex, you have to stigmatize something else.
It's just stupid, and it's kind of like what we were talking about before the show, right? You're not going to be able to make a whole lot of great art if you saddle all of these filmmakers and writers with endless handcuffs, telling them that if you break this rule, this unspoken rule, it's always about stereotypes. It's always about stereotypes. I don't know anyone, and at least I've never met anyone who has said something as stupid as like, being handicapped is equating to evil. That's insane. I don't know anyone who would believe something like that. And it seems more like projection on your part than anything else. And you're not treating people like adults, and you're defiling the work of these creators who don't have a say in whether or not these things are getting changed. It's why I'm kind of growing more and more to the idea that you shouldn't even be able to leave these things in the property of an estate. You shouldn't allow, because sure, maybe your kids, maybe your children will treat the property with the respect that you feel it deserves because you are the one that raised them and instilled your values in them. You don't have any way
I don't even know if you can rely on that.
Okay, no, it's fine. But I'm saying, but I certainly don't think that the third generation down the line is going to give a crap about what granddad did with his art, as long as if it's making him that amount of money. If MGM comes to them and say, hey, we want to do this James Bond story and we'll pay you an insane amount of money by continuing to use the character, sure. But we got to make these changes. Your kid might have, first of all, your kids probably got your money anyways because they were there when you were becoming rich. They might have the principle to stand up and be like, no, we're not making these changes. But I don't think that the generation after that will have the same moral qualms. And it's insane. And it's unbelievably elitist to believe that you are some arbiter for what is right with somebody else's art.
Mm-hmm. Is this the kind of thing that they talk about at the Pop Culture Association of America?
No, they make the opposite argument.
Oh, now it'd probably give you a headache to listen to a typical paper at the Pop Culture Association. If you want to hear about here's a queer interpretation of Tenet. Would you like to hear that?
That sounds awful.
I shudder to think.
That sounds awful.
By Claudine Gay.
I look at these stories, and these are going to become more and more prominent because everything's being bought up by corporations.
Well, when Amazon made Rings of Power, it's interesting that they made the Lord of the Rings and fantasy genre fan base into their punching bag rather than Tolkien. Because I know for a fact that all of these executives at Amazon and all the creatives involved in that show, they would find Tolkien's personal views and the worldview that arguably allowed him to imagine such a story, they would find it abhorrent. And they would reject it like in all of its facets. So they chose to attack the Lord of the Rings fan base instead of Tolkien because it would just look like too evil if they were to actually attack Tolkien. But we're not that far away from them outwardly attacking him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just
Why not?
I would love to see a little bit more backbone from some of these companies to be like, look, they could
backbone from companies.
They could reframe.
You're speaking a different language.
They could reframe it. They could be like, it's not that we don't like the idea of trigger warnings. It says we, as a corporation that you're paying money to, we have faith that you are an adult and you can make informed decisions for yourself and your children without putting some type of kids mode. I guess kids mode is different, but you know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Without making this, without dumbing this down for you, we believe that you can interpret this on your own terms. Like, I do watch a lot of old shows on television, and to be fair, none of the ones that I watch get trigger warnings on them. But I mentioned recently I've been rewatching this show Las Vegas, and there's more than a bit of not unkind, but joking language around transgenderism that just wouldn't fly today. They would never make those jokes today. And they're not even made mean-spiritedly. They're just jokes, and you're not allowed to make those jokes.
A lot of what you look at, really most comedies from even 5 years ago, not even to mention, comedies from decades ago, but even 5 years ago, and there's so many jokes that you wouldn't get away with now. And as far as trigger warnings, I mean, I just don't know who those are for. Does anybody actually really look at those? It all seems very kind of masturbatory, honestly, in a sense of like people are just doing this for some kind of satisfaction to say, oh, we did it, we put a trigger warning on there, but no one cares. It doesn't have an effect on anything.
The teenagers that they surveyed about how they feel about trigger warnings, they're not watching any of these movies from the 60s. I find movies and TV shows from the 21st century to be far more offensive than anything that was made in the 60s, for instance. Because at least back then, there was a concept of obscenity. And there are certain things that should not be publicly shown.
The 60s was still pretty tame. The 70s is when you got into a lot of art that actually, not just in terms of jokes, but like sex scenes and things like that actually today do seem racy. I mean, I was watching an old Clint Eastwood movie, and of course he's someone who's always gone toward edgier humor in his films, but he was making rape jokes and he was making racial jokes, and there was a dog that they named faggot in this film as a gay joke, and like all of this stuff. And I'm not saying these are all great things, but I was just like, wow, things have just changed so much. You wouldn't get away with any of this. But I don't know. But it seems like the trigger warnings, those are just so ridiculous. When people start talking about trigger warnings, I can't take it seriously. And of course, in academia, we were supposed to use those. So anytime I showed a film with any kind of content that could possibly be objectionable, even if it was like violence or just sexuality in general, we were supposed to put trigger warnings on our syllabus. And
really,
I had, toward the end of my teaching career, I had numerous students who would sign up for a film class or a literature class, And they would come see me after class and they would say, I can't watch certain films on this list because I have anxiety. And so I'll need to do the alternate assignment. Just sort of as if, not even asking, just as if, okay, you're going to accommodate me, right? Because I'm triggered. And so they would just assume they're going to get alternate assignments. And I would say, well, no, you either watch the course or you're going to have to drop it. And, I started seeing more and more students with emotional support animals who couldn't attend class without their emotional support dogs. I'm not joking.
Yeah.
And then you have situations too, not to tread on anyone's toes with the ADD debate, but I would say that a good 20 to 30% of every class that I taught toward the end, 20 to 30% of my students would come to see me after class and would declare that they were disabled because they had ADD and they needed extra time on tests and they needed all these different accommodations and separate notes and a separate room to take the test in. And I'm just thinking, where are we at now where 30% of my students really think that they're disabled, like they're blind because they have ADD? Like I just feel like they really we've made a big mistake in coddling a lot of these anxieties and these weak perspectives.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Damn.
Yeah.
You were compelled to give trigger warnings. And did you feel morally torn about doing so?
Compelled in the sense that, not that we were told we absolutely had to, but in the sense that we were told, students, they're very fragile. And so if you're going to have any kind of content that could cause them, any kind of psychological distress, then you should just to be safe, you should have a trigger warning. And then with the disability stuff, like that's stuff that I couldn't contest. So I wanted so badly, every time I had a student who would tell me that they needed a separate room to take tests in because of their ADHD, I wanted so badly to tell them the real world is not this way. You do not need a separate room and you shouldn't get one, because in the real world, your boss is not going to give you all these extra accommodations. But I legally could not do that.
Yeah.
So in all of my classes, 20 to 30% of my students, they considered themselves disabled, and I had to treat them as if they were disabled and give them all of these extra accommodations. So it's that and the trigger warnings and the emotional support animals that I started seeing more toward the end of my career.
Just turns into a zoo by the end.
Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.